So easy.
And we're live. It is Tuesday, June 24th, the year of our Lord 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m., and you will never guess what June 24th is according to the United Nations General Assembly. Uh, it is International Day of Women in Diplomacy, devoted to eliminating structural barriers to women's leadership in diplomacy. And that is, of course, according to General Assembly Resolution 76-269. Um, I want to point out that the International Day of Women in Diplomacy follows immediately International Day of Widows, which, suggests that if we start killing off husbands,
Mm.
women will the next day don banners of leadership
I
in
get it.
diplomacy. You gotta take these 2 days in relation to one another, kill off a guy, and his now liberated wife will become a leader in
Well,
diplomacy.
I have to say that if we did kill a bunch of men, a lot of problems would be solved.
I'm just
I'm just
saying,
saying.
one of them would be that these guys are clearly holding back their wives from becoming leaders and eliminating the structural barriers to women's leadership in diplomacy is the men they're married to. And so I just want to say, as somebody who is married to a woman who is, without my death, a
I know.
leader in
That's the only
diplomacy,
reason you're still alive.
I feel safe from this because whatever else you may say about me, whatever else my crimes against feminism might have been,
You're married
I
to a
am
power woman.
I am not a barrier to women, evidently not a barrier to
Yeah.
women's
Oh,
leadership in
she's
diplomacy.
your lady's legit.
All right, look, the sun is shining. It's shining a little too much,
It
to
is.
be
I'm
honest.
dying. I
It's
hate it. I'm so
it's
glad I'm leaving this place.
It's really unpleasant. Is it hotter or less hot in Kenya?
Okay, you've triggered me after Jeff triggered me yesterday, and I have a rant. I'm
All
sorry,
right.
interrupting the proceedings. People, Kenya is not hot. Kenya is on the equator, yes, but I would say, okay, the most inhabited parts of Kenya is not hot. In fact, it is one of the world's most perfect climates because it is on the equator, yes, but it is also high altitude.
How
Like,
high is it?
well, Nairobi is about 5,000 feet. I
Oh, it's not
lived
that
at
high.
8,000 feet. And in fact, if you do not listen to your tour guide, Holly, and bring socks and a jacket and layers, you will freeze your butt off at night because there's no heat or AC because it's not needed. It's one of the world's most perfect climates. It can get a little warm in some locations during the day, but arid. And at night, it gets down, like where I lived, it could get down into the low 40s. The
Wow.
low 40s. So it is
And it's the
not
same
hot in
temperature
Kenya.
all year round.
And it's the same all year round, roughly, although there's rainy seasons and dry seasons, and there's slightly warmer and slightly cooler seasons. And it is the most perfect weather. It has spoiled me forever and ever. I hate the heat. You can see why a bunch of like British people who live in the weather that they do hit the Kenya highlands and were like, we are not, this is where we belong. I mean, they
Interesting.
didn't ask the Kenyans,
See,
but
all of that is follows merely from the words the sun is shining. We haven't even gotten as far as the birds are chirping. The birds are chirping. It is going to be a great freaking day, whether you're in Kenya or in Washington. And it's a sad day for me because today is the day we are at Lawfare having our goodbye lunch for the estimable Quinta Jurassic.
what?
Yes,
Where is she going?
Quinta is going to the Atlantic,
Oh,
where
the
she,
Atlantic still takes everyone. All the people go to the Atlantic.
I just want to say I could be bitter about this, but Quinta has worked for Lawfare for 10 full years, her entire adult life. And uh, I cannot in good conscience advise her that it is a good idea for her to stay on longer when she has an offer from the estimable Jeffrey Goldberg. And I cannot begrudge her desire to move on to other things. So, with
Very,
tears in
very happy for her.
our eyes, we are saying goodbye to Quinta today, and sending her off with parades have a bad with flowers and hugs and kisses and whatever, and parades and butterflies. And uh, yeah, it's going to be a great fucking day. You are watching Dog Shirt TV. And what do we have to say about that, Mr. Cactus, in your death throes?
You're watching. That's
You're
all.
watching.
Oh, now he's like, oh, he's still kind of on, and he's trying. He's trying.
He's trying.
Look. Uh, uh.
You're watching the death throes of Cactus here. The snowman is triumphant.
This is hysterical. It's like he's having like little.
Little spasms.
It's like he's doing like some sort of 80s breakdance.
You are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is
That
a
is
revolution in morning television, because where else can you find out about a UN General Assembly resolution, then learn about the climate in the Kenyan highlands, and then see a plastic cactus die before your eyes,
He's still happy though.
all within the first 7 minutes of the show, all improvised, none of it scripted, and all before a word of substance is uttered on any subject. That's one of the revolutionary features. Another one of the revolutionary features is that we have no agenda today. We don't have a guest. We haven't discussed what is going on, what we're talking
I
about.
have questions for you though.
Oh, but Holly has questions. So that's a place to start. Um, let's start.
Okay, so I have been incredibly busy, and so my consumption of the news has been not what it should be. But I did see last night, I saw a headline about the Supreme Court allowing these renditions or whatever, that's what I would call it, to
To
third
South
countries
Sudan.
without like what? I thought, and also I'm confused because I thought they had already ruled on this.
No, they ruled on a different question, which is the availability of the Alien Enemies Act to remove people. Um, so the question here, and um, I want to be careful about how I talk about this, because the Supreme Court actually didn't articulate any uh, ruling. It ruled, but it didn't issue an opinion. And so it's actually requires to figure out what basis they did this on. Well, all they actually did was they issued a stay of a lower court opinion. And so they didn't say what the government wants to do was okay. What they merely said was, we're staying the lower court opinion that stops it, which allows it to go forward at least until the court rules otherwise. But they didn't say why. They didn't say what their theory was. And to figure that out, you would have to go through the lower court, the briefs that they received, which I'm going to do today, and figure out what the government excuse me, what the government was arguing to them. Now, I'm pretty sure that the answer to that question is that they don't have jurisdiction over this matter at all because of a series of laws that Congress passed stripping them of jurisdiction. I have not parsed those laws carefully, and so I don't know um, whether there is any merit to their position at all. And you know, six of them who are relatively, you know, different in important aspects of their thinking, think this was sufficiently obvious that it didn't require a discussion. And I have enough respect for the intellects of a few of them to at least want to be careful about knowing what I'm talking about before I denounce it. That all said, as a big throat clear, I was very shocked by the decision, and I um, am confused, let's just say, about how you could do something with that consequence for human liberty, which literally involves dumping people in South Sudan without a chance to make an argument that,
Among other things.
yeah, that they're going to have, major torture or life problems as a result, um, without offering an explanation. And I think that's like, Congress did act repeatedly to try to strip the court of certain jurisdiction over habeas matters involving immigration cases. And so it may be that they're right, and that the problem here is that Congress passed these very reckless jurisdiction stripping laws. But I want to see that argument laid out and compare it to what Sonia Sotomayor wrote in dissent that the other two liberals signed. And I want to sort of figure out um, whether there's anything to be said for that position. And I will spend some time on that today and probably write my column on it tomorrow. What it seems to me there is no excuse for is doing that without a written opinion. And I just can't imagine the circumstances in which it's appropriate to say, oh, fuck them, just turn them over to South.
This is
Juba seems like a nice place.
this is what I don't understand though. A lot of these and this is what's frustrating me writ large about the courts right now. Because so there's all these sort of picky-ish, not, I mean, they're important. It's important. I'm not saying they're not, but like sort of tactical, you know, jurisdiction, little procedural matters, I guess. And then there's like the big, like basic constitutional human rights matters. And to me, it's like, why this, to me, like if I were in charge, the Supreme Court, it's like Brown versus the Board of Education. Like, stop pissing around. Like, just say, you can't do this in America. You can't just go to the heart of the matter and get rid of this. This is unacceptable.
Right. So, unfortunately, that's not how the law works,
But
right?
sometimes it seems to, right? I mean, they can decide to issue a really broad ruling, or they can choose a little matter, right?
So again, I'm handicapped here because where the court does not have jurisdiction, jurisdiction is literally the power to issue any ruling at all, right? The power to consider the matter. And it may be that six justices of the Supreme Court, rightly or wrongly, earnestly believe they have no power to consider the matter. And there are crazy things that they have no power to consider. For example, whether the United States goes to war. Um, right? There are big, big things that are just outside of the jurisdiction of
But
the
like
court.
a human being's basic rights under the Constitution, under the first 10 or so, maybe 14 amendments of the Constitution, to me is like, what else is the Constitution for and what else is the Supreme Court for?
Well, so look, you can ask me that in my capacity as Ben Wittes, or you can ask me that as my capacity as a watcher of the judiciary over time. And if you're asking me in the latter capacity, I will say there are a bunch of human liberty questions that are completely outside the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and of lower courts, and that Congress has on occasion recklessly expanded that category, including in the Department of Immigration, and may have done so here in a fashion that deprives the court of power to consider this matter. Now, Sonia Sotomayor thinks otherwise. And as I said, I am going to spend a lot of today and a lot of tomorrow trying to figure out what the merits of the question are. They have no bearing on the moral merits of it, which is, you know, like as you don't have to have a law degree to say, wow, it's really not appropriate to send people to South Sudan without a chance to making a non-refoulement argument. Without any due process, blah, 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 blah. You don't have to, like, that's not a legal point. That's a moral point. Um, the the legal merits of this question are probably more complicated than that. And I don't say that with any joy. I don't want to, like, but, I do think I do expect that when I dive into this question, it's not going to be obvious that Sotomayor is correct.
Okay, but the court, if Congress passes a law that violates the Constitution, the court can void the law.
Unfortunately, if you open to Article 3 of the Constitution, you will see that the appellate jurisdiction of the Supreme Court is mostly a matter of definition by Congress. Um, and there are some exceptions to that where its jurisdiction is sort of inherent, but it's Congress has a lot of power over the court's jurisdiction. And um, there are some areas, particularly in habeas, particularly relative to the Guantanamo detentions, where the court said, whoa, you can't strip us of that jurisdiction. But I don't think they've ever said that of the immigration space where Congress's power is huge. And so, the general rule is Congress, and I am not an immigration law expert, but the general rule is that Congress in the immigration space has said you have to go through normal immigration procedures before you can appeal to the federal courts, and then you appeal in this one very specialized fashion, which is to your local appeals court.
Okay,
And
but what if Congress decides or the president decides, so all these people, we're going to deport undocumented people, and we're going to set up a slave labor camp off the coast of Florida, maybe in Guantanamo Bay.
do we control it?
So that's it. So it's the other country piece of it.
Well, so if we set it up at Guantanamo, there is a Supreme Court decision, Boumediene, that says there is habeas jurisdiction at Guantanamo. So
So it's just that they're
so
getting another.
there's a big Guantanamo exception to the rules. Um, if you imagine that we used the Bahamas and we didn't control it, but it's an offshore labor camp run by the Bahamian
What
government.
if it's run by just private citizens? They're just giving free labor. Let's say there's an American plantation owner in
Well,
Bahamas.
well, you'd have to start with the question of who's the sovereign of the. If it's sovereign U.S. territory, there's going to be habeas. If it's not sovereign U.S. territory, that's the El Salvador situation.
What if it's like owned by an American though? Like it's a plantation.
Well, I don't think the private ownership of it
Okay.
matters.
All right.
Now, I mean, these are sovereignty questions, not. Um, Now, the other question is, of course, who are they held by? If they're held by an American official, you could say there's going to be some kind of jurisdiction over the official. That gets starting to look like the Guantanamo case.
Yeah,
But
what
look,
if
my
Trump has a phone factory
but
in
my
on board?
but my point is something different, which is this is a substantive stripping of jurisdiction. It basically says the federal courts don't, and there's like four of them, I think. I haven't gone through this carefully, but there are four separate laws, several separate laws anyway, trying to strip jurisdiction of the courts over habeas cases in the immigration context. And Judge Murphy's contention is that this case slips between them, like, like a running back going through, bobbing and weaving through the jurisdiction stripping provisions and makes it to the end zone. And clearly, six justices don't agree with him. Um, I don't have an opinion about that. Um, except to hope that he's right and they're wrong. Um, which is, which is what Sotomayor argues. But I think that there is um, you know, the famous Justice Jackson line that the Supreme Court isn't final because it's infallible because it's final. That's actually the rule with which we live, and um, you know, we gotta obviously you continue litigating the question. Judge Murphy, by the way, contends that his existing uh, order is still in effect. The not the preliminary injunction, but the other one. And so I don't think this thing is over, but it is. It doesn't do anybody any good to pretend that there's no jurisdictional issue here. If six justices think there's a jurisdictional issue, there's a jurisdictional issue by definition, and we got to work with that.
Well, I feel a lot less secure in my constitutional rights here in this country in the last few months than I did before. Like, what the fact that these people that they have the 200 or so that are still in El Salvador, the fact that they're still sitting there just blows my mind. And like they're like without any sort of due process at all or even plan of like a review of their cases or a day in court or an endpoint to their imprisonment. Like I'm not, obviously I have no legal expertise, but it just like blows my mind that this has happened. How is this possible in America?
Okay, so a couple things. One is it's shocking and unconscionable that it has happened in America or on American auspices in Djibouti. And I'm not going to make excuses for it. There are 100 ways to have deported these people without this problem arising, and they chose a way that was um, maximally in your face. And I don't mean in our collective face, but I mean in your face, Holly Berkley Fletcher, in the sense that they said,
Well,
like,
I
no, I really believe this, that Stephen Miller is sitting there, like this, thinking, how can I do this in a fashion that it may be less efficient as a matter of getting people out of the country, but
Yeah.
will most upset a set of people like Holly
You
Berkley
actually
Fletcher.
believe in what America is supposed to be.
Right. He's trying to do it in a way that's maximally upsetting to you. Um, and
Mission accomplished, Stephen.
yeah, I think no, but I think that's right. And I think one of the keys to this is not to play his game. That our job, um, as you know, is not to not get upset about it because it is genuinely upsetting, but to not freak out at his command and not freak out at the Supreme Court's command. Here's the test. Are the problems they're creating remediable? To the extent that they are not remediable, like CCOT, we should be freaking out and yelling about it. There are still 260 people who were, wrongly deported to CCOT without due process, and we don't have control over them anymore. And to the extent that there are people in Djibouti in shipping containers, uh, our job is to insist that they be given appropriate due process either there or and to the extent that the Supreme Court disagrees with that, we may lose. But like, I don't want my emotional state to be dictated by the Supreme Court or this or Stephen Miller, or we just have to focus on what what needs to happen to remediate serious problems, to prevent those problems. And I think last weekend was a great example of that. The 5 million people or whatever um, turning out to protest. But I don't think, um, and obviously criticism, fierce criticism of the Supreme Court to the extent they're wrong about this. Um, and fierce criticism of Congress to the extent the Supreme Court is right about this, which, like, it may be the answer to this question that, this was a reckless and disgusting thing for Congress to have done, and that we are reaping the whirlwind of it now, um, you know, rather than 10 or 15 years ago when Congress did this, and that it's actually not Sam Alito's fault. I don't know the answer to that question. That's what I'm going to spend some time thinking about the next couple of days. But I do think, just being steely eyed about what the problem is, protecting the rights of people whose rights need to be protected, and you know, not having our chests ripped open and our hearts bleeding every time Stephen Miller goes boo, because he can go boo over and over and over again. And I just don't want to live that way.
Well, I agree that I mean the courts, the rule of law is all we have left, honestly, such that it is. And I do not agree with people who then, you know, basically start attacking the institution of the court. I mean, I think it's fine. I think it's clear that two members of the Supreme Court are completely deranged and have lost their way. I think that's pretty clear. But the rest of them, I'm still open to think that they're, can be reasonable. And the institution of the court, it's not, to me, it's not a matter of like whether this is a bad institution or a good institution. We don't, it's the only one that we have. And so I agree with what I think I hear you saying, and that you have to, you have to play the game by the rules that we have, um, and work within the system that we have.
But you
I'm
also have to you have to identify the problem in the right location, right? If the problem here is that six justices of the Supreme Court don't give a shit, and the law actually allows uh, court jurisdiction here, and they're just not playing ball because they don't care if Trump does this. That's one problem. By the way, a very hard problem to do anything about. But um, a different problem is if Congress passed a set of jurisdiction stripping provisions that they are uh, plausibly or correctly applying, and that there's actually the problem is the law they've been asked to interpret. That's a different problem, and I do think it is worth knowing which problem we're dealing with before we I'm all for yelling and screaming about it, and I will give you a report tomorrow about what I think is worth yelling and screaming about. But I do think it's worth knowing that before, at least before I tell you I think what the court did is outrageous, or I think what the court did is sadly justified, right? I do think it matters what the merits of the question are.
Well, I'll leave that to you because I have zero expertise on this on this matter.
All right, next item on the agenda.
I think that's it. I
Oh,
saw another
you
I
said
think
questions.
Okay, well, there was another case I saw. It's so weird about all these. I mean, it's just a blizzard of Honestly, I don't know how you all, whose job it is to keep track of all this, manage to keep track of all this because it just seems like a blizzard of cases and issues and then the lower court says one thing and then another court says another thing. But I did see that
So,
I
quick
think
answer. We have a whole team that tracks this stuff. Like
nonetheless, I think it's
none
amazing.
none of us is doing it by ourselves. We have I don't know, depends how you count, but 8 or 10 people who are to one degree or another working on the tracking component for us.
Well, it's still quite the blizzard out there. Um, so I saw that the judge in was it Tennessee in the Kilmaro Garcia case, um, basically handed the DOJ their ass in that opinion regarding
Regarding his
whether or not,
detention.
yeah, whether or not, yeah.
Yeah, so that opinion I have glanced at. And I will say, first of all, to anybody who has read my the situation column from the day before I left for vacation or a couple days before, where I identified 5 cases that I thought the government was going to have 5 criminal cases that I thought were politically motivated, and you know said very clearly that political motivation tends to is a corruption, and when you corrupt a case, you tend to will almost always diminish the integrity of the case, and that I expect to see a higher than normal rate of non-conviction in these cases. And one of those cases was Kilmaro Garcia, and and by the way, the first ruling that considers the evidence that the government puts forward says, release this guy. Now, couple caveats. One is release doesn't actually mean release because he's going to be in immigration detention even if he's not in criminal detention. So what release means here is bail in the criminal from the criminal context, from the criminal justice system. So it's a little bit academic. The second point is the matters the evidentiary standard in which he's the evidentiary issues on which they're holding him. They asked for detention pretrial are somewhat different from the ones that um, you have to prove to convict him. So
Mhm, mhm.
one of them is, for example, that one of the victims is a minor.
Yeah.
That's you know really a pleading question. One of them is that he's a flight risk. Um, so it's possible that their evidence on the case in chief is rock solid, but their evidence on the bail conditions or detention conditions are weak. Do I believe that? Not for a freaking second. Um,
So I looked through a little bit of that, or I've read an article about it. But it seemed the judge's ruling seemed to present more of the actual evidentiary basis for his indictment than the actual indictment did.
yes,
Am I
because they
right
had
about?
a full day hearing on the
Yeah.
detention, and there's
And so
significant overlap between the subjects. I mean, they're principally the same,
yeah.
but the bail question will hinge on a narrower subset of them. But look, if you're asking, do I think this is evidence that the case is weak? Shit, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
because in the indictment, I looked through the original indictment, and it was like, oh, there's some things in here that okay, maybe he's done some things, and I figured like a grand jury, indicted him, right? But then this ruling, I mean, do I understand correctly that it seems the entire case hinges on two sources who are very compromised, like they themselves are in deep shit with the government.
yes. So look, this is plain from the text of the indictment itself that this is co-conspirator liability, co-conspirator testimony that is going to, this whole case is going to hinge or fall on it. Now, that is not always a terrible thing.
Yeah,
And,
I realize that's how
and
the
I
world
will
works. I
point
mean,
out a good example in the other direction. The entire criminal case against Donald Trump in New York hinged on the testimony of Michael Cohen. And Michael Cohen was an enormously compromised witness. And by the way, I think he was clearly telling the truth on on the major points, and the jury unanimously agreed with me.
but
Um,
he had already served. I mean, he didn't get a deal out of that,
he
did he?
sure did.
Oh, he did. Okay,
Yes.
on the
Uh,
state charges, he'd
well,
already
he didn't.
federal,
The
right?
state didn't prosecute him, and so and all of this is. And by the way, the state didn't prosecute him, at least according to the defense, for a subsequent perjury either. And so, yeah, he got a deal out of it.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
benefited. He also got money out of it, not from the state, but he's making a living,
True.
on this.
True.
And so, the entire defense was, well, there were many components of the defense, but one big component of the defense was you can't trust Michael Cohen, because he's a rat and a, and a. Uh, so these co-conspirator testimony cases are, look, they are fraught. They are sometimes very merited, and I don't want to say categorically
Sure.
that because Kilmaro Garcia is implicated by two MS-13 guys who claim he worked with them, that per se means that the case is bullshit. I will say that the one of the prosecutors appears to have resigned over the indictment. I will also say that a federal magistrate judge looking at it raised some questions in a 51-page opinion. And I will say that I have lots of other reasons to be skeptical of this case, including that it embarrassed the president in an Oval Office meeting with a foreign head of state. And so am I very prepared to see the case founder on the unreliable testimony of co-conspirators? Yes. Am I certain that's going to happen? No. Would I be surprised if he got convicted or pled? No. Would I be more than typically surprised if he beat the rap? Absolutely not. I think it is. I don't know what likelihood I give it, but I do think the chances that that this case just falls apart are non-zero.
Why do you think the grand jury indicted him?
Well, probable cause is a low standard. And, is there probable cause to believe he committed these crimes? Sure.
I guess
Um,
there's witnesses or
there are witnesses. There's body cam footage from that stop in Tennessee. There's, um, you know, there's all
there's
kinds of
also he did, according
atmosphere.
to the indictment anyway, he did lie about like where he was coming from, and he and his car data like contradicted him, which
Right.
I
So you present that stuff to a grand jury that's hearing, a million cases, and you say, is there probable cause? And the answer is, of course, there's probable cause. The but that's not the standard that federal prosecutors usually use. The standard in the Justice Manual, and I'm doing this from memory, so if I get the details wrong, guys, bear with me and correct me in the chat. The standard in the Justice Manual is, do you believe in good faith that a jury, um, that a reasonable jury would convict on the facts that the evidence you're capable of presenting? So that means there's a huge gap between the probable cause standard and the regulatory standard that prosecutors are
sure.
instructed to observe, which is, do you believe you can get a conviction based on proof beyond a reasonable doubt using only admissible evidence before a reasonable jury? Um, if the answer to that question is no, it doesn't matter if there's probable cause. You shouldn't bring that case.
Okay.
And I have no doubt. Well, one prosecutor resigned.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, I don't think he said, I resigned because I don't think this case was compliant with the Justice Manual, but that is how I interpret it.
Yeah. So let me ask you then about this sort of the case for his deportation, why he's still in immigration detention, and I was confused about that too because when they admitted they accidentally deported him the first time, against that a court had earlier said he could stay in the United States, and then they deported him, and then that was a mistake. They've already admitted that. So what is the immigration case against him?
So the immigration case, um, first of all, would be based on some the withholding of deportation was only a withholding of deportation to El Salvador. So you could put him on a plane for South Sudan tomorrow,
All right,
according to the Supreme Court.
I see. So the
Um,
fact that he was sent to El Salvador was the issue,
yeah.
because that was the basis of his. He had come from there originally, and did he claim asylum? No.
Um, I believe there. I believe it's not an asylum claim; it's a withholding of deportation claim.
Okay.
So the 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 general rule is we deport people to the countries they came from. There's a variety of weird exceptions to that rule, but there is authority to deport people to third countries. But generally speaking, if you're an El Salvadoran national and you're going to be deported, you're going to be deported to El Salvador.
Sure.
So a court comes along and says, you can't deport him to El Salvador because he has a reasonable fear of getting whacked by MS-13 or by that other gang that he was going to get whacked by. And so that functionally means they're not going to deport you, at least until this administration, unless you're somebody who's very big and very important. So, for example, the um, there are people we've deported who are like political leadership who, we don't want in the United States, but we can't send them to their home countries for some reason. So you send them to some other country. Think Manuel Noriega, right? He finishes serving his sentence in the United States. We're not going to send him. I think we sent him to France. It may have been an extradition, but generally speaking, you know, we don't deport people to third countries very often.
Right.
Um, now, in so in his case, a withholding of deportation to El Salvador functionally means he doesn't get deported. Now, if the administration really wants to deport him, they can. They can deport him based, he's been found to be deportable. They just have to find a country that's willing to
I got
take
it.
him.
Okay, I missed that nuance. I mean, one of the other issues that his case raises that has vexed me in many of the cases that we see is apparently, like I had assumed, apparently wrongly, I knew being married to an American didn't that wasn't like you didn't get automatic like citizen, or whatever. But I thought it would afford more protections. But they're rounding up all these spouses of military members, like
Yeah.
military
So
spouses.
this is a very, this I know the answer to. It's a pretty simple question. So if you are abroad and you marry an American, that presumptively entitles you to permanent residency status. Um, Hence the green card wedding phenomenon, right? Which I don't think is really a thing, that much of a
I
thing. But
I've known someone who did it.
yeah,
So
we all, um, but look,
I mean,
I,
not like she was in a relationship, but it was like not as you know what I'm saying. Like,
they
anyway,
stay
that's another
together.
whole story, huh? No, no, they got divorced.
I see. Um, yeah, so I know lots of people who have green cards because they married Americans. And that's a very, it's one of the easiest ways to get a green card if you're overseas. You jump the line, it still takes a while, but
By the
you
way, as an American woman in Africa, this really your citizen it really raises your hotness level by quite a bit.
marketability, just walk
Yeah.
around with your passport.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
everybody wants you to marry them and take them to America.
um, if you are an illegal alien in the United States, marrying an American citizen does nothing for you.
Oh,
Okay? So, um, the fact that Kilmaro Garcia married a woman who was a citizen of the United States doesn't change his status at all. If she,
oh,
before he had come here at 16, had gone to El Salvador, fallen in love with Kilmaro Garcia, married the 16-year-old, that'd be super creepy, and then went to a U.S. Consulate or embassy and says, "Hey, here's my 16-year-old husband. Give him a green card." They might have looked at her funny, but they would have, he would be entitled to
okay.
immigrate.
See, I don't know how I didn't know that, but this is enormously helpful. This is the episode where Ben answers all Holly's stupid questions.
None of them are stupid questions. Oh,
He probably answered them elsewhere, and I just
John
have.
Hawkinson is calling in with a stupid question.
You're not, with a clarification.
Yes.
So, if you are an illegal immigrant in the United States and you marry a U.S. citizen, there is a process to regularize your citizenship, and it is a torturous, complicated one. Uh, and, but it does exist, and the government
Do
has
you
also,
know? Do you know of anybody who has effectuated it?
yes.
Really?
So we had a big class action case here that was filed in 2018 that just settled in January called Calderon because ICE was arresting the spouses, the illegal immigrant spouses, at their consular interviews with USCIS. Where you go through an I-130 waiver process and preliminary waiver process, and then there's a second, some 200 series process, and it takes several years and several somewhat discretionary processes, but they're not fully discretionary. But certainly, when you show up to get interviewed to prove the validity of your marriage, it's not okay for ICE to arrest you at that time. So anyway, it's not hopeless, Holly, if you want to marry someone in the U.S.
I'm already married, but
I don't know how many are allowed, but
Do we know
oh, you have
anything
a daughter, and
I just want to say my sister did this, right? She married a man who had overstayed a visa and was working here not legally, and they got married, and then they did manage to get his status regularized. I don't remember it taking years. It took a while. I know that she said that it helped that my husband, well, my fiance at the time, husband and I had attended the wedding because it was an extremely informal wedding, and they were skeptical that that was the case. They got married on a catamaran in a mangrove swamp in Florida. So but we were there, so there were family members there. It did help legitimize it. And
But
again, I don't know in detail what they did, but it was not impossible, and it was not that fast.
It's
yeah,
worth
so
noting, Carol, that overstaying your visa is not illegal entry, and so it can be a very different situation than someone who crossed the border illegally.
It could be, you could,
And
yeah,
well, at least that
I'm
used
not
to
going
be
to
true.
disagree with
I will
that.
just say,
Am I wrong? John, your background noise is deafening. So when you're not speaking, yeah, there you go. So am I wrong to think though that normal administrations did not really prioritize these people who were married to American citizens in the way that this administration seems to be going after them willy-nilly, including if they're a military spouse? Again, that to me, like, don't you get some kind of pass if you're like,
whether they're going after them or whether targeting them or whether they're just being completely indiscriminate
I think
is
they're being
unclear to me.
indiscriminate, but
Look,
it seems like they should be discriminate in these cases.
I know of other cases in which, past administrations, they generally involve people suspected of terrorism. So the famous example is the Sami Al-Arian case in Florida, where he was I think he was an LPR, uh, but and his kids were citizens, and I believe his wife was a citizen, um, and that was across administrations kind of thing. I don't know of any. So there are certainly cases where it's happened. I don't know of anything like the volume in any prior administration of people who's not suspected of anything. They're military. It's pretty crazy. I will say, John and Carol's corrective is well taken. The so let me just say the presumption is really different if it's so if you are uh uh if you go on vacation to Barcelona and meet a beautiful Spanish man or woman and marry him or her, that person's going to get a green card pretty easily. If that person comes and overstays a visa or enters illegally and you fall in love in, San Antonio, Texas, and you get married, that person is presumptively deportable unless and until he or she goes through the process that may be onerous or may be less onerous, but that person is at risk.
Right. My clarification was just it's not impossible.
No, no, it's a very good point, and I suspect it affects a small percentage of the people who came here or stayed illegally and are married to American citizens. But for those, but look, if you are married to an American citizen and you are not a lawful resident, regularize your status as quickly, although maybe you can't now because you'll be detained at a consular visit. But, John is absolutely right, and Carol is absolutely right that there are processes for this sort of thing.
There's also the folks who are married people who are here on student visas, and I'm not sure actually where that falls on the continuum or how fast you can get a green card.
I believe if you are, I am not anybody's lawyer, and I would say 70%,
Ooh, you're
I
my
would,
lawyer. You're the
I
only one I have.
I would 70% say this is informed by something, and 30% say I may be making it up. So, you know, I believe the answer is if you're here on a student visa and you get married, you have to leave the country and then you can then apply for LPR from abroad.
I
But
think
I'm not sure about
I
that.
believe that is a general truth. It's not only the student visa folks, it's actually even the if you're here illegally and you have to leave the country, although I guess there's a waiver. So yes, but I was more curious, the question was really, uh, how painful the process is. Having to leave for a consular interview is sort of like a dipping your toe in the lake situation where you leave and you come back 2 weeks later. Uh, that's not painful in the sense that having to go somewhere for 2 years or wait in line for 4 years or 7 years for a green card, whatever can be.
The big takeaway for all of this is if you are not here legally, save, scrimp, and spend whatever money you need to do in order to be represented by counsel. There's a huge difference in outcome between people who try to manage this themselves and people who have decent legal representation. And, you know, don't think this is a process you can navigate on your own. It isn't. And I understand that there's a viable response to that, a truthful response that say, hey, that's easy for you to say. You don't have to pay for my lawyer. And that's right. It's really expensive. And this is a class of people who are often not in a position to pay for it. And there is a catch-22 there. But it really, really matters. So, you know, go to your church, go to your fraternal organizations and say, hey, look, I got a problem. You know, there are people who will help. It really matters if you're represented by a lawyer in these proceedings. Folks.
I have a couple last little announcements before we go, if you don't mind.
Yeah, but you've, at least on my screen, you've turned into a black rectangle.
What? No, I'm
I
here.
can't see you.
Can you see me now?
No, let me refresh my screen. Just talk and we'll see if the
So
problem
weird.
may be at my end.
I didn't do anything. Can everyone else see me? Anyway, you can hear me, so I'll just keep talking. They say they can see me, so maybe you've just lost
So
your
I'll
vision.
just assume the problem is on my end then.
Maybe your eyes have failed you. Anyway, so we're still on the book. We're slowly getting the book launch events on the calendar. A few of them from the book releases August 19th, and we have some things into October. We're still waiting on Politics and Prose. So if you want to beg them to see me at Politics and Prose, they haven't said no, but they haven't said yes. So we're still waiting on that.
And when are you back from Africa?
July 22nd.
Hmm.
But I did get a very exciting. So my actual, as it turns out, on my launch day, it's going to be in Grand Rapids with Kristen Dumais.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So viewers will remember Kristen Dumais because she was on an early episode of Dog Shirt TV with her on her book, Jesus and John
The
Wayne.
best-selling book, Jesus and John Wayne.
Yeah, she's extremely impressive.
Everywhere. She's everywhere. And she's extremely nice and generous too. And so as of now, and it could fall apart, but as of now, she has said yes. And we have a bookstore in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that we're going to do an event at. So,
well, I think I am going to throw you a book party here in the Washington area, although I have to figure out where. And
you should hit up one of our friends.
Yeah, well, my house is not the best house for a book party for reasons of voluminous mess, but you know, we can work around that. I also am planning to be in Ukraine in August for some of the time, and so I'm not sure. We have to work around.
It'll be fine, Ben. No, don't stress. Don't stress. We can do it anytime. Like I was planning to have my launch day thing here in DC, but this opportunity landed.
No, it's too good.
And so
Make sure it's filmed.
Yeah, we'll do that. We'll definitely do that. So that's exciting. And gotten, good early reviews, and the advanced readers are starting to write some things about it. So, yeah, it's exciting.
Holly Berkley Fletcher, you're a great American. We're gonna weep bitter tears tomorrow on your farewell appearance on Dogshirt TV before you jet off. An important announcement: Holly Berkley Fletcher will be acting Beastmaster, choosing and photographing the beasts of the day, uh,
Starting next week.
starting next week.
Yeah.
I still have a week full of
And
beasts.
I got to get these to you. I don't know. You want me to leave them at your house?
Oh, well, I can't see. I assume you're talking about the cactus and
Yeah,
the snowman.
that's right.
We can arrange that offline.
Okay.
Um, and the snowman is going to, the cactus is going to finish dying his natural death and then be reborn,
That'll be
like a
exciting.
phoenix rising from the ashes, a
That'll be
cactus
so exciting.
rising from the ashes. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. It's going to be Holly's last day before Safari. There may be a guest, there may not be a guest, but you're going to be there, and I'm going to be there, and this dog or some variant is going to be there, and Holly's going to be there, and that's really all you need.